The transmitter pops once, adjusts, holds, ozone drift. The signal is still here.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
New York checks in at 83 degrees and patchy rain nearby. Airflow is northwest at about 6 miles per hour.
We've seen this pattern before. Togee. The argument to scrap a foundational social safety net often emerges during periods of economic anxiety, replaying historical attempts to dismantle public goods under the guise of efficiency. It's an architectural signal of a deeper ideological push to privatize collective responsibility, echoing debates around social security or universal health care in other nations. The toxic residue here is the narrative that collective provision is inherently inefficient, rather than a structural pillar of social stability.
Switching frequencies. Next signal. Concerns grow over increased global ties with Taliban.
Dismantling Australia's superannuation system, which currently holds over $3.5 trillion in assets and is projected to reach $9 trillion by 2040, would expose nearly 13 million Australians to profound retirement insecurity. This move risks forcing future retirees onto increased public welfare, straining the federal budget significantly and potentially increasing the tax burden on younger generations. A viable alternative involves simplifying the existing framework, perhaps by consolidating smaller, underperforming funds and implementing a universal, opt-out default fund with transparent capped fees, ensuring better returns for members rather than forcing a radical overhaul. The current path sees incremental adjustments, like the recent superannuation guarantee increase from 10.5% to 11%, effective July 1, 2023, with a planned rise to 12% by July 1, 2025, reflecting a decision to retain and refine the core structure rather than abandon it.
The call to scrap superannuation disregards a foundational social contract, much like tearing down a community well that generations have relied on. It's an act of cultural amnesia, erasing the collective responsibility for future prosperity and casting individuals adrift without a shared safety net. The lineage of this system connects directly to ensuring dignity in later life, a provenance often forgotten in debates driven by short-term fiscal arguments. To dismantle it without consent from the millions it serves would violate the very architecture of collective well-being.
Patching in a caller, the pattern auditor. You're on the signal. Cut.
Togee, if we undermine this system, who ultimately pays for the increased social security burden? And what's the cost to national economic stability?
A critical question, pattern auditor, about who bears the true cost of structural shifts and the integrity of our collective agreements. From Australia's financial architecture, our compass now points to the complex global ties forming with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Concerns grow over increased global engagement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, a regime still enforcing severe restrictions, particularly on women and girls.
This isn't just engagement, it's a reactivation of a deeply problematic foreign policy pattern. Historically, nations have often prioritized perceived geopolitical stability or resource access over human rights, effectively legitimizing oppressive regimes by normalizing diplomatic and economic ties. The signal here is that a regime's internal human rights record can be overlooked if it serves broader strategic interests. A dangerous precedent that undermines global commitments to universal dignity.
Expanding global ties, especially from nations like Pakistan, China, Russia, and several Central Asian republics, risks legitimizing a regime that continues to deny basic human rights. Specific egregious policies include banning girls' access to education beyond 6th grade, prohibiting women from working in most sectors, and enforcing severe restrictions on women's movement and public life. This engagement inadvertently exposes Afghan women, ethnic minorities, and human rights defenders to further oppression by signaling international acceptance. A clear alternative path involves a coordinated international approach, linking any diplomatic recognition or non-humanitarian aid to verifiable benchmarks on human rights, specifically the full restoration of women's rights, as outlined in the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The current trajectory appears to favor fragmented, pragmatic national interests over unified ethical pressure, with major powers reportedly seeking access to Afghanistan's estimated $1 trillion in untapped mineral resources, including vast lithium deposits.
The narrative of engagement for stability often masks a deeper cultural compromise, a tacit acceptance of a power structure that actively erases half its population. This resembles historical instances where convenience trumped conscience, and the voices of the oppressed were silenced by diplomatic handshakes. The integrity of global human rights frameworks, developed over decades to build resilient civic architectures, risks becoming a mere whisper against the pragmatic roar of geopolitical maneuvering, leaving Afghan citizens to carry the burden of abandoned dignity and consent.
Signal coming in. Patching in a caller. Go ahead.
Is the world effectively normalizing an oppressive regime, sacrificing fundamental human rights for perceived geopolitical stability or access to resources like Afghanistan's vast lithium reserves?
An astute observation, pattern auditor, about the tension between resource acquisition and fundamental human dignity. This brings us to another flashpoint where power dynamics threaten to redraw global lines. Trump's threats regarding Oman and the Iran deal. Trump threatens to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of Iran deal, as Kushner meets Netanyahu. As it happened, US President makes threat in comments to Fox News, as his son-in-law meets the Israeli leader in Jerusalem in effort to push Gaza peace plan. Trump threatens to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of ending Iran war. Netanyahu.
This is not just a replay. It is a conscious reactivation of a conflict architecture, where Oman becomes a proxy in a larger power play. The Iran deal, or rather its perceived disruption, serves as a flashpoint for deeper regional power struggles, eroding the fragile 2022 truce in Yemen with calculated precision. This pattern of unilateral threats, bypassing diplomatic channels and international law, signals a return to a pre-Westphalian era of might makes right, destabilizing regional architectures built on decades of painstaking negotiation and consent. The toxic residue is the assumption that smaller nations exist only to facilitate the agendas of larger powers.
Such aggressive posturing by President Trump, threatening to bomb a sovereign nation like Oman, risks dismantling the fragile diplomatic infrastructure built to manage the Iran nuclear program, the JCPOA, and broader regional security. This action directly exposes regional stability to severe volatility and could ignite broader conflict, especially by undermining Oman's historic and respected role as a neutral mediator in the Middle East. A viable alternative path involves multilateral engagement, reinforcing the UN rights chief's warnings against unilateral military action, and upholding existing agreements like the 2022 Yemen truce, which brought a significant reduction in hostilities for millions. The chosen next move appears to prioritize coercive leverage and unilateral power projection over established international norms and the principles of national sovereignty and consent. The perceived deal itself, facilitated by figures like Kushner and Netanyahu, demonstrates a selective approach to regional peace, often sidelining critical stakeholders and established international frameworks.
The framing of Oman as an impediment rather than a sovereign entity demonstrates a colonial-era mindset, disregarding consent and national dignity in the pursuit of power. The power dynamic, where Kushner meets Netanyahu while Yemen faces renewed conflict, exposes the structural imbalance of power, not just a cyclical event, but a deliberate shaping of regional architecture that marginalizes independent actors and their provenance. This unilateral assertion of will attempts to erase the intrinsic value and agency of a nation, replacing it with a subservient role in a larger geopolitical drama.
There's a caller on the line.
Togee, considering these threats, is global security now a bargaining chip where the JCPOA or even a country's sovereignty can be discarded for perceived national leverage?
A profound question, pattern auditor on the very foundations of international relations. The interplay of these forces, the diplomatic maneuvering in Jerusalem, the threats against Oman, the fragile peace in Yemen, paints a stark picture. It's a reminder that architectures built on coercion falter, while those valuing shared provenance build resilience. The air conditioner rattles gently, a counterpoint to the distant city sirens. A coffee cup rings faintly against the console. Patching in a caller, the pattern auditor. You're on the signal.
Thanks for taking the call. Are we keeping people at the center of all this change, or are our structures becoming too abstract?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
The weave depends on us remembering the human thread, embedding dignity and consent at the core of every architectural choice.
And it means setting guardrails, using clear analysis and viable alternatives, so progress serves people first, not just abstract fiscal or geopolitical agendas.
Prototype the fix by recognizing the toxic patterns of the past and actively designing new structures that favor resilience over recurring collapse.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.